The reservation confirmation glowed on my phone screen. Chez Laurent, 7 p.m. 8 years. I smoothed my black dress one final time and checked the small velvet box in my purse. Inside lay vintage cufflinks I'd found at an estate sale last month. Platinum with tiny sapphires, the kind of understated elegance Ethan appreciated in others, but rarely noticed in me. My name is Lena Torres. I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered that the man I loved for 8 years saw me as nothing more than a decorative burden, until the night his arrogance cost him everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and the gentle clink of silverware against porcelain. Ethan arrived 10 minutes late, his phone pressed to his ear, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to someone about quarterly projections. He slid into the booth across from me without ending the call, holding up one finger in that universal "just a minute" gesture that had become his signature move. "Rodriguez, I need those numbers by tomorrow morning," he said into the phone, his voice carrying that executive tone he'd perfected over the years. "No excuses, the Caldwell meeting can't be delayed." I waited, watching him perform. Even at our anniversary dinner, he couldn't resist the theater of importance. When he finally hung up, he didn't apologize for the delay. "Sorry, babe. Big things happening at work. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." He loosened his tie and scanned the menu. "This place is nice. Expensive, though. Good thing I got that raise." "Happy anniversary," I said softly, sliding the velvet box across the white tablecloth. Ethan glanced at it with mild curiosity before opening it. His eyebrows lifted slightly. The cufflinks were beautiful, and he knew quality when he saw it. "These are nice. Probably cost you a fortune, though. You really shouldn't be spending money like this when you don't have an income." He closed the box and set it aside. "I mean, it's sweet, but impractical." The waiter appeared, and Ethan launched into an elaborate order, making substitutions and special requests that highlighted his sophistication. When it was my turn, I asked for the salmon simply prepared. "So predictable," he muttered, shaking his head with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. As our wine arrived, Ethan's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then began typing rapidly. "Another crisis?" I asked. "You could say that. Caldwell wants a complete restructure of our client retention strategy. I'm basically running that department now. It's exhausting being the only one there with real vision." I tried to steer the conversation toward us. "Do you remember our first anniversary? We went to that little Italian place downtown, and that dive?" God, we were so broke then. Well, I was broke. Lucky for me, I married up. He gestured around the restaurant. "Look how far I've come. Regional director track. Corner office next year if everything goes according to plan." "We've come far," I corrected gently. Ethan's smile faltered. "We? What exactly have you contributed to my success, Lena?" His voice carried a sharpness that made me flinch. "I mean, really. You stay home, you spend my money, you decorate my apartment. That's not building a career." The couple at the table next to us had gone quiet, their conversation dying as they pretended not to listen. Heat crept up my neck. "I support you. I take care of everything so you can focus on work. I thought—" "You thought what? That making dinner and organizing my closet counts as contributing?" Ethan's voice rose slightly. "Lena, I love you, but let's be honest here. You're completely dependent on me. You have no skills, no experience, no value in the real world." The words hit like physical blows. I gripped my wine glass tighter, feeling the crystal stem warm under my fingers. That's not fair, I managed. It's reality. Ethan's tone turned condescending, the voice he used when explaining obvious things to slower colleagues. Look, I don't mind supporting you. It's what husbands do. But don't pretend you're some kind of partner in my success. You're. He paused, searching for the right word, while the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. You're worthless when it comes to anything that actually matters. The word hung in the air like smoke. I felt it settle into my chest, heavy and suffocating. Around us, conversations had stopped entirely. The woman at the neighboring table stared openly, her mouth slightly agape. Even our waiter, approaching with our appetizers, hesitated mid-stride. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely audible.
But he was already checking his phone again, oblivious to the damage he'd inflicted. Sorry, what? Oh, right. Look, I didn't mean it harshly. It's just the truth. Some people build things, others... He shrugged, not bothering to finish the sentence. I excused myself to the restroom, walking on unsteady legs past tables full of people who'd witnessed my humiliation. In the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized, hollow-eyed, diminished, smaller somehow than she'd been an hour ago. When I returned to the table, Ethan was charming the waiter with stories about his upcoming promotion. He'd already forgotten his cruelty and moved on to the next performance. I sat quietly through the rest of dinner, responding to his monologue with nods and murmurs, while something cold and calculating began to bloom in the space where my heart used to be. As we left the restaurant, Ethan took my hand with casual ownership. "Nice dinner," he said, "though next year, maybe somewhere less stuffy. I'm thinking we'll be celebrating bigger things by then." I squeezed his hand and smiled. "I'm sure we will." But as we walked to the car, I was already thinking about the meeting I'd declined 6 months ago. Mr. Caldwell's gentle voice on the phone. "The board would like to meet their true leader soon, Ms. Torres. Your father's company needs its rightful owner." Maybe it was time to stop hiding. The elevator ride to our apartment felt eternal. Ethan scrolled through emails while I stood beside him, the word worthless echoing in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. When the doors opened on the 23rd floor, he was already talking about tomorrow's meetings. "Caldwell specifically requested me for the Henderson account," he said, unlocking our door. "That's huge, Lena. That account is worth millions. If I land it..." He tossed his keys onto the marble entry table, the one I'd spent weeks selecting, the one that perfectly complemented our living room's aesthetic. I hung my coat in the closet I'd organized with military precision, every item in its designated space. The apartment around us gleamed with the evidence of my invisible labor, fresh flowers I'd arranged that morning, books perfectly aligned on shelves I'd curated, throw pillows artfully arranged on the sofa I'd spent months researching. "You know what your problem is," Ethan said, settling into his leather chair with a tumbler of whiskey I hadn't seen him pour. "You waste your potential. You could have gotten a job years ago, contributed something meaningful to society. Instead, you chose to be this." He gestured vaguely at me, and I felt myself shrink under his assessment. "You act like caring for our home isn't work," I said quietly. "Because it isn't. Real work creates value. Real work builds empires." He took a sip and studied me over the rim of his glass. "Your father understood that. Don Miguel Torres knew what it meant to create something lasting. What would he think, seeing you waste your life playing house?" The mention of my father sent ice through my veins. Ethan had met him only twice before the cancer took him 3 years ago. Both times, Papa had been polite but distant, watching Ethan with the careful eyes of a man who'd built an empire by reading people. I excused myself and walked to our restroom, needing space to breathe. But even here, surrounded by the life I'd carefully constructed, Ethan's words followed me. In our walk-in closet, I reached behind my winter coats and pulled out a small wooden box, the one thing I'd kept hidden from my husband for 8 years. Inside lay the documents that could change everything. "Mija," my father had said during our last conversation, his voice weak but his eyes still sharp. "Power is most dangerous when it's invisible. The world will try to make you small, try to convince you that your worth comes from others' approval. But remember, true strength reveals itself when the moment is right, not before." I was 26 then, overwhelmed by grief and the weight of inheritance I'd never asked for. The company, Torres International, had been Papa's life work, growing from a small import business to a multinational corporation with interests in shipping, real estate, and technology. When he died, controlling interest passed to me, 52% of shares in a company worth over $2 billion. But I'd kept it a secret. I stared at the papers, recognizing reports I'd reviewed months ago in my private meetings with Mr. Caldwell. Ethan was preparing to present strategies for optimizing my own company's operations, completely unaware that every decision he hoped to influence ultimately rested with the woman he'd called worthless 3 hours earlier. "The funny thing about this company," Ethan continued, "is how it's held back by these anonymous shareholders, probably trust fund babies who inherited daddy's money and don't know the first thing about business. If I were running things—" He shook his head in frustration. "What would you do differently?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Cut the fat. These old-school executives like Caldwell are too sentimental, too focused on legacy employees and outdated loyalty systems. Modern business requires ruthless efficiency." He gestured at the financial reports. "Look at these numbers. We could increase profits by 30% just by streamlining operations and cutting dead weight." The dead weight he referenced included pension plans for retired workers, the scholarship fund my father had established for employees' children, and the profit-sharing system that had made Torres International one of the most desirable places to work in the industry. "Sounds cold," I said. Ethan finally looked at me, his expression patient but condescending. That's the difference between people who build things and people who just exist. You see cutting expenses as cold. I see it as smart business. That's why I'm climbing the ladder, while you're— He waved his hand dismissively. "While I'm what?" "While you're arranging flowers and picking out throw pillows." He returned to his papers. "Look, I don't mean to be harsh. You're good at the domestic stuff. It's just not valuable in any meaningful way." I stood there for a long moment, watching him work with my company's confidential documents, listening to him dismiss both me and the legacy my father had built. Something crystallized in that moment. Not anger, exactly, but a cold clarity I hadn't felt in years. "I think I'll call Marisol tomorrow. Maybe meet for coffee." "Sure, whatever. Just don't make plans for Thursday evening. The Henderson account dinner is that night, and I'll need you to pick up my dry cleaning beforehand. Image matters in these situations." I nodded and kissed the top of his head goodnight, the same ritual we'd performed for 8 years. But as I brushed my teeth and prepared for bed, I was thinking about tomorrow's phone call to my best friend, and the other call I'd been avoiding for too long. Mr. Caldwell had been patient, respecting my desire for privacy. But patience, like everything else, had its limits. And after tonight, I was beginning to understand that some secrets weren't protection. There were prisons. In the darkness of our bedroom, with Ethan snoring softly beside me, I finally admitted the truth I'd been avoiding for years. I hadn't been protecting our marriage by hiding my inheritance. I'd been protecting an illusion. And illusions, once shattered, could never be repaired. Tomorrow, I would start dismantling the careful lies that had shaped our life together. Tonight, I would remember what it felt like to be Miguel Torres's daughter, not Ethan's worthless wife, but the rightful owner of an empire. The time for hiding was over. Kathy Luna sat tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing boutique, its windows fogged with steam from the espresso machine. I had chosen a corner table, partially hidden behind a potted fern, though I wasn't sure why I felt the need to hide. Marisol arrived 15 minutes early, as she always did,
her curly hair pulled back in a messy bun and her lawyer's intensity barely contained by her casual Saturday clothes. "You look terrible," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. No preamble, no social niceties, just Marisol's trademark directness. "Good morning to you too," I managed a weak smile. She studied my face with the same scrutiny she applied to legal briefs. What did that pendejo do now? Marisol had never liked Ethan. From the beginning, she'd seen through his charm to something calculating underneath. But she'd held her tongue for my sake, limiting her criticism to raised eyebrows and pointed silences. Our anniversary dinner was last night. Let me guess. He spent the whole time talking about work and checking his phone. Among other things. I took a breath, steeling myself to repeat words that still felt like physical wounds. He called me worthless. Marisol's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. He what? In front of a restaurant full of people. He said I contribute nothing, that I'm completely dependent on him, that I swallowed hard. Worthless when it comes to anything that actually matters. The cup hit the saucer with a sharp clink. That son of a bitch!
Marie, no, Lena, no excuses, no explanations, no, he was stressed or he didn't mean it. That man publicly humiliated you on your anniversary. Her voice carried the steel that made her formidable in courtrooms. What kind of husband says that to his wife? What kind of human being says that to anyone? I stared into my coffee, watching the foam spiral dissolve. Maybe he's not wrong, though. I don't work, I don't contribute financially. Stop. Marisol reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Just stop. You're talking like he's brainwashed you into believing his bullshit. She was right, of course. Somewhere along the way, I'd internalized Ethan's dismissive attitude toward my choices, his subtle undermining of my worth. But hearing it stated so plainly made me flinch. He thinks he's so important at Torres Internacional, I said quietly. You should see him with those reports talking about cutting deadweight and streamlining operations. He has no idea. I trailed off, realizing what I'd almost revealed. He has no idea what? Marisol's eyes sharpened. She'd known me for 15 years, since we were college roommates. She could read my silences better than most people could read words. I looked around the cafe, confirming we were alone in our corner. Even so, I lowered my voice. He has no idea that he's talking about my company. Marisol went very still. Your company? Torres Internacional. I'm the majority shareholder. I inherited it when Papa died. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Marisol was speechless. She stared at me with her mouth slightly open, processing this revelation. You own Torres Internacional? She repeated slowly. 52%. Controlling interest. The Torres Internacional, the shipping and real estate conglomerate, is worth about $2 billion, last I checked. Marisol leaned back in her chair, running both hands through her hair. Lena Maria Torres, are you telling me that while your husband called you worthless, you were sitting there owning the company he works for? When she put it like that, the irony was almost laughable. Almost. I never told anyone except the lawyers and Mr. Caldwell. Why the hell not? It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. I wanted him to love me for who I was, not what I inherited. I wanted a normal marriage. And how did that work out for you? The bitterness in her voice matched the taste in my mouth. 8 years of hiding, 8 years of letting Ethan believe he was the provider, the success story, the important one in our relationship. 8 years of making myself small so he could feel big. He doesn't even know my father founded the company. He talks about the anonymous shareholders like they're parasites. Last night he said they were probably trust fund babies who don't understand business. The fucking irony, Marisol shook her head. Lena, do you realize what this means? He's been treating you like garbage while living off your family's legacy. He's been dismissing your worth while building his entire career on your inheritance. It's not that simple.
It's exactly that simple. She leaned forward, her voice urgent. This man has been emotionally abusing you for years, making you question your own value while you literally own the source of his professional success. Don't you see how twisted that is? I did see it now that she'd laid it out so starkly. The realization made me feel sick and empowered simultaneously. What am I supposed to do with this information? I asked. You're supposed to stop letting him walk all over you. You're supposed to remember who you really are. Marisol's eyes blazed. Lena, you're not some dependent housewife. You're the daughter of Miguel Borges, the inheritor of a business empire, the woman with the power to make or break careers in that industry, including his. I never wanted that power, but you have it. The question is, what are you going to do with it?
A group of college students entered the cafe, their laughter loud and carefree. I envied their simplicity, their uncomplicated lives. But there was no going back to simplicity now. Ethan had shattered that possibility with a single word: worthless. Mr. Caldwell has been asking me to attend board meetings, I said slowly. He wants me to take a more active role in the company. And I always declined. I told him I preferred to stay in the background. While your husband climbs the ladder at your company, bad-mouthing the mysterious shareholders, meaning you, and treating you like shit at home? Marisol signaled the waitress for another coffee. Lena, this isn't a romantic comedy where you nobly sacrifice yourself for love. This is your life, your legacy. Your father didn't build that empire so some ungrateful asshole could insult his daughter at anniversary dinners. She was right, of course. Papa had been many things: demanding, traditional, sometimes stern. But he'd raised me to be strong. He'd trusted me with his life's work and believed I had the wisdom to use that power responsibly. By hiding from it, I'd dishonored both his memory and his faith in me. There's a board dinner next week, I said slowly. Ethan mentioned it. He's preparing some big presentation for Mr. Caldwell. Will you be there? I thought about Mr. Caldwell's last phone call, his gentle but persistent invitation to join the board's social events. I'd always declined, but maybe I could be. Marisol smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Now that would be interesting. You think I should do it? I think you should stop asking permission to exist in your own life. She reached for my hand again. Lena, I've watched you shrink for 8 years. I've watched you dim your own light so that a mediocre man could feel brighter. Last night, he called you worthless in public. In public, mija. Don't you think it's time he learned exactly how wrong he is? I sat there in that steamy cafe, surrounded by the chatter of strangers living their uncompressed lives, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly, but something colder and more dangerous. Resolve. What would my father do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your father would have destroyed him years ago for treating his daughter with such disrespect. Marisol's smile grew sharper. But your father was never called worthless by someone who owed everything to his generosity. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Mr. Caldwell's contact information. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. Lena? Marisol's voice was gentle now. You don't have to do anything dramatic. You don't have to destroy him or humiliate him or even confront him. But you do have to stop letting him destroy you. She was right. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself, about honoring the woman my father had raised, the legacy he'd entrusted to me, the strength I'd buried under 8 years of trying to be someone else's version of a perfect wife. I pressed the call. Mr. Caldwell, this is Lena Torres. About that board dinner next week.
I think it's time I attended. The Torres International Building rose 43 stories into the Seattle skyline, its glass facade reflecting the sun like a mirror. From his corner office on the 32nd floor, Ethan Torres surveyed the city below with the satisfaction of a man convinced he was destined for greatness. "Rodriguez, get in here," he called to his assistant, not bothering to look away from the window. "I need the Morrison files and the Henderson projections." At 35, Ethan had climbed from junior analyst to regional director in just 6 years. His colleagues attributed his success to natural charisma and an aggressive work ethic, but Ethan knew better. He understood the game: corporate politics, strategic networking, and the art of making yourself indispensable to the right people. "Sir?" Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, arms full of folders. "The board dinner is Thursday night. Caldwell specifically requested my presentation on operational efficiency." Ethan finally turned from the window, straightening his tie. "This is it, Rodriguez. This is how I moved from regional director to VP track." Rodriguez nodded politely, though something flickered in his expression. "Of course, sir. The files you requested." As Rodriguez retreated, Ethan spread the documents across his mahogany desk, the same desk that had belonged to 3 previous regional directors, each of whom had failed to achieve what Ethan considered inevitable: recognition as the company's true visionary.
His phone buzzed with a text from his golf partner, Marcus Chen, another ambitious executive from the marketing division. "Drinks after work? Need to discuss the Henderson situation." Ethan replied immediately, "Absolutely. Murphy's at 6. Murphy's was the kind of upscale bar where Torres International's middle management gathered to dissect company politics over $16 cocktails. By the time Ethan arrived, Marcus had already secured their usual table in the back corner, 2 whiskey neat reeing. "So," Marcus said without preamble, "heard you're presenting to the full board Thursday. Word travels fast." Ethan settled into his chair, savoring the burn of expensive whiskey. "Caldwell wants a comprehensive analysis of our shipping division's efficiency gaps. Big opportunity. Huge opportunity. The kind that separates the real players from the wannabes." Ethan leaned forward conspiratorially. "You want to know what's wrong with this company, Marcus? It's stuck in the past. All this sentimental bullshit about legacy employees and company loyalty. Modern business doesn't run on feelings." Marcus nodded, though his expression remained carefully neutral. "The old guard does seem attached to traditional approaches." "Exactly. Take Caldwell. Decent enough guy, but he's been here since the company was founded. He still thinks it's like 1985. Ethan gestured expansively. "And don't get me started on the mysterious shareholders, anonymous trust fund babies who inherited daddy's money and think they understand maritime logistics. You really think the shareholders are that disconnected? I know they are. Look at the profit margins we could be achieving with proper streamlining. But no, we have to maintain these bloated pension plans and scholarship funds. We have to keep deadweight employees because of some misguided loyalty to the founder's memory." Ethan's voice rose with passion, drawing glances from neighboring tables. He lowered it slightly but maintained his intensity. "The founder built something impressive. I'll give him that. Miguel Torres was a visionary for his time. But his time is over. This company needs leadership that understands 21st century realities." "And you see yourself as that leader?" "I don't see myself as it. I am it. Thursday night, I'm going to present a restructuring plan that could increase profits by 30% within 18 months, cut the sentiment, maximize efficiency, eliminate waste." Ethan drained his whiskey. "It's exactly what this company needs, whether the board realizes it or not." Marcus studied him carefully. "What about employee morale, company culture? What about them? We're not running a charity, Marcus. We're running a business. Employees who can't adapt to modern expectations don't deserve to stay comfortable." Ethan signaled for another round. "The shipping industry is cutthroat. Companies that prioritize feelings over profits don't survive." Interesting perspective. It's the only perspective that matters. These old-school executives like Caldwell, they're nice guys, but they lack the killer instinct required for real success.
They're too worried about hurting feelings, too concerned about maintaining some romanticized vision of what the company used to be. What Ethan didn't notice was the way Marcus's jaw tightened, or how his friend's usual enthusiasm for gossip had been replaced by careful, probing questions. Marcus Chen had been with Torres International for 8 years, long enough to remember Miguel Torres personally, long enough to understand exactly who the anonymous shareholders were. You know, Marcus said slowly, I heard an interesting rumor about the board dinner guest list. Oh? Word is some of the major shareholders might actually attend this time, face-to-face meetings with senior staff. Ethan's eyes lit up. Perfect! Let them see what real leadership looks like. Let them understand what they've been missing by staying in the shadows. You're not curious about who they might be? Honestly, no. Rich kids who inherited money they didn't earn, probably. The kind of people who think business runs on good intentions and family legacy. Ethan laughed, the sound carrying more contempt than humor. I just hope they're smart enough to recognize superior strategy when they see it. Marcus excused himself to the restroom, but instead of heading towards the back of the bar, he stepped outside and made a phone call. Mr. Caldwell, it's Marcus Chen. I think you need to know about a conversation I just had with Ethan Torres. Yes, sir, about the shareholders and the company's legacy. No, sir, he has no idea who he's really talking about. When Marcus returned to the table, Ethan was already planning his triumph.
Thursday night changes everything, Ethan said, raising his fresh whiskey in a mock toast to the death of sentimentality and the rise of real business acumen. Marcus raised his glass reluctantly. To Thursday night. But as they drank, Marcus was thinking about another conversation he'd had recently, one with Mr. Caldwell about respecting the founder's daughter, about protecting her privacy while she chose to remain in the background, about the quiet dignity of a woman who owned an empire but lived like any other corporate wife. Ethan Torres had no idea he was about to walk into a room where his contempt for the company's legacy would be heard by the very person who embodied that legacy. He had no clue that his dismissive attitude toward the anonymous shareholders would be witnessed by the woman who could end his career with a single phone call. Thursday night was going to be very interesting indeed. As they finished their drinks, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Don't forget to pick up your dry cleaning tomorrow. Image matters, right? He showed Marcus the message, rolling his eyes. See what I mean about people not understanding priorities? My wife thinks picking up dry cleaning is an important business strategy. Marcus said nothing, but he was thinking about the rumors he'd heard, about Lena Torres's quiet presence at charity events, about the respectful way Mr. Caldwell spoke of the founder's family, about the careful distinction between the company's public face and its private ownership. Thursday night couldn't come soon enough. The phone call with Mr. Caldwell lasted exactly 17 minutes, but those 17 minutes changed the trajectory of my life. Ms. Torres, his familiar voice carried the same gentle authority I remembered from my father's funeral. I'm delighted you've decided to join us. Your father would be very proud. I sat in my living room surrounded by the perfect domesticity I'd cultivated for 8 years and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle stretched below in afternoon sunlight, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged to something larger than Ethan's narrow definition of my worth. I should have accepted your invitation sooner, I admitted. You needed time to grieve, to find your own path. There's no shame in that. Mr. Caldwell's voice carried decades of patience. But I think recent events suggest it's time for Torres International to remember who we really serve. He knew. Somehow, he knew about the anniversary dinner, about Ethan's humiliation, about the breaking point that had finally driven me to reclaim my inheritance. The realization should have embarrassed me, but instead it felt like relief. Someone else had been watching and had been waiting for me to find my strength. What should I expect on Thursday evening? I asked. Dinner will be at the Union Club, 7 o'clock. It's a quarterly tradition. Board members, senior staff, key shareholders. Very informal, very collegial.
His pause carried weight. Your husband will be presenting his operational efficiency recommendations. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Ethan would be presenting his vision for my company to my board while I sat at the same table as his wife rather than his employer. Mr. Caldwell? Yes. Does anyone else know I'll be attending? The board, of course, and I've informed the staff that we'll have special guests, though I haven't specified who. Another pause. Miss Torres, I want you to know, whatever happens Thursday evening, you have the full support of this board. Your father chose his successor wisely. After the call ended, I sat in the silence of our apartment, processing what I'd committed to. In 3 days, I would walk into a room full of people who knew exactly who I was, while my husband performed for an audience that included the woman he'd called worthless. The front door opened, and Ethan's voice carried from the entryway. Lena, are you here? Living room, I called back, quickly closing the legal folders I'd been reviewing. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie with one hand while scrolling through his phone with the other. Good day. Caldwell approved my presentation for Thursday. This is it, babe. This is how I make VP track. I watched him pour himself a scotch, his movements confident and satisfied. He had no idea that his career advancement depended entirely on the approval of the woman he dismissed as worthless. Tell me about the presentation, I said.
Ethan's eyes lit up. Nothing energized him like discussing his professional brilliance. Comprehensive restructuring of our shipping operations. I've identified 30% cost savings through strategic downsizing and elimination of redundant legacy programs. Legacy programs? Pension obligations to retired employees, scholarship funds, profit-sharing arrangements. Sentimental stuff that looks good on paper but kills profitability. He settled into his leather chair. The company was founded by someone who clearly prioritized feelings over business sense. I kept my expression carefully neutral. What do you know about the founder? Miguel Torres. Built the company from nothing, which is impressive, but he was too soft. Too concerned with employee loyalty and community responsibility. Ethan swirled his scotch. Classic, old-school mentality. Good for building a family business, terrible for maximizing shareholder value. I thought you said the shareholders were trust fund babies. They are. Probably his kids or grandkids who inherited everything and don't understand real business. He laughed. I'm hoping some of them show up Thursday so they can see what actual leadership looks like. My phone buzzed with a text from Marisol. How did the call go? Are you ready for Thursday? I typed back, as ready as I'll ever be. What's Thursday? Ethan asked, glancing at my phone. Dinner with Marisol, girls' night. The lie came easily, which should have bothered me more than it did. Good. I'll be out late anyway, networking after the board dinner. He stood, checking his reflection in the mirror above our mantel. Image is everything in these situations. First impressions matter. What will you wear? The navy Armani, conservative but expensive, projects competence and success. He adjusted his already perfect tie. You should probably stay on Thursday night anyway. I'll need my lucky shirt pressed, and the dry cleaning place never gets the collars right. I nodded, playing the dutiful wife role I'd perfected over 8 years. Of course. But inside, I was thinking about my own wardrobe choices for Thursday evening. Not the understated dresses and cardigans I usually wore, but something that commanded attention. Something that announced presence rather than apologizing for it. The next morning, while Ethan was at his weekly golf game, I drove to Nordstrom. The personal shopping appointment I'd booked yielded a black silk dress that hugged my curves without being ostentatious, paired with my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one inheritance Ethan knew about, though he'd always dismissed it as nice but not particularly valuable. Standing in the dressing room mirror, I looked like someone I barely remembered. Confident, elegant, powerful. The woman my father had raised, not the diminished version I'd become. My phone rang. Mr. Caldwell's number. Miss Torres, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to mention, your husband has been quite vocal about his opinions regarding company ownership and legacy policies. What kind of opinions? The kind that suggests he has very strong feelings about shareholders he's never met and traditions he doesn't understand.
His voice carried a warning. "I thought you should be prepared for the possibility that Thursday evening might be illuminating. For him or for me? Perhaps both." That evening, Ethan came home energized from his golf game and 2 hours of networking with other ambitious executives. "Ran into Peterson from accounting," he said, mixing himself a drink. "He mentioned there might be some surprise attendees at Thursday's dinner. Major shareholders, apparently." "That sounds important. It could be huge. If I can get FaceTime with the real power brokers, show them my restructuring plan directly," he grinned. "This could skip me right past VP track into senior leadership." I watched him dream about impressing people who already knew exactly who he was and what they thought of them. The anticipation was almost unbearable. "Ethan, yeah? Do you ever wonder what those shareholders might think of your restructuring plans?" He paused mid-sip. "What do you mean?" "Well, if they've been involved with the company for years, they might have different perspectives on those legacy programs you want to eliminate."
Then they'll learn something about modern business reality. His confidence never wavered. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions to maximize value. If they can't handle that, they shouldn't be in charge of a major corporation. I smiled and nodded, the perfect supportive wife. But I was thinking about my father's words. Power is most dangerous when it's invisible. Thursday was going to be very educational indeed. The Union Club occupied the top 3 floors of a historic downtown building, its mahogany-paneled dining room offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay. I arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, my black silk dress and grandmother's pearls drawing approving nods from the valet and hostess. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged in a room designed for power. Mr. Caldwell appeared at my elbow almost immediately, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile warm but respectful. "Miss Torres, you look radiant." "Thank you for this opportunity," I said quietly. "The opportunity is ours." He gestured toward a table where several distinguished men and women were already seated. "The board is eager to finally meet you properly." As we approached, the conversations quieted. These were people I'd seen at my father's funeral 3 years ago, executives who'd built their careers under his leadership, board members who'd watched Torres International grow from a family business into a multinational corporation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Caldwell said, "I'd like you to meet Lena Torres." The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Chairs scraped back as they rose, faces lighting up with genuine pleasure, and something that looked like relief. Margaret Fontaine, the board's senior independent director, reached for my hands with tears in her eyes. "My dear, you look so much like your father. We've missed having a Torres presence at these gatherings." Robert Kim, the chief financial officer, nodded gravely. "Your father spoke of you often. He was very proud of your intelligence, your values." As I settled into the chair Mr. Caldwell held for me, I felt the weight of their expectations, their respect, their deference. These were titans of industry, people who commanded billion-dollar budgets and made decisions that affected thousands of employees. And they were looking at me like I was the missing piece of something important. "Excuse me." The voice cut through our conversation like ice water. I turned to see Ethan standing behind my chair, his navy Armani suit impeccable, his expression confused and slightly annoyed. He continued, addressing Mr. Caldwell. "I think there's been some mistake. This is my wife, Lena. She's not supposed to be here." The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Margaret Fontaine's eyebrows rose toward her silver hairline. Robert Kim's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. But Mr. Caldwell's expression remained perfectly pleasant. "Mr. Torres, how good of you to join us. Please, have a seat." Ethan remained standing, his confusion evident. "But she can't be here. This is a business dinner. Board members and senior staff only." "Indeed it is," Mr. Caldwell agreed. "Miss Torres, would you like to introduce your husband to the other board members?" The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the soft jazz playing in the restaurant's main dining room 3 floors below. Ethan's face cycled through confusion, realization, and something approaching panic. Board members?" he repeated. "Please, sit down, Ethan. You're making a scene." He sat heavily in the chair beside me, but his eyes never left my face.
Around the table, the other executives watched with varying degrees of amusement and disapproval. This was clearly not how they expected the evening to unfold. "Perhaps," Margaret said delicately, "we should order wine before we begin tonight's presentations." As if on cue, servers appeared with bottles of vintage Bordeaux, the same wine my father had served at company celebrations. I accepted a glass and tried to ignore Ethan's burning stare. "Lena," he whispered urgently, "what the hell is going on?" "Lower your voice," I murmured back. "You wanted to impress the board, didn't you?" The conversation resumed around us, but I could feel Ethan's tension radiating like heat. He kept glancing between me and the other board members, trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense in his carefully constructed worldview. "So, Miss Torres, Mr. Caldwell tells us you've been following the quarterly reports with great interest."
I have. The shipping division's performance has been particularly impressive this quarter. Yes, though I believe we'll be hearing some alternative perspectives on operational efficiency tonight. His glance toward Ethan was polite but cool. Ethan straightened in his chair, recognizing his cue. "Actually, that's my presentation. I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of cost-saving opportunities through strategic restructuring." "How interesting," Margaret said. "And what's your background in maritime logistics, Mr. Torres?" "6 years of progressive experience in operations management. I've studied the industry extensively." "Self-taught, then?" Something in her tone made Ethan's jaw tighten. "I believe fresh perspectives are often more valuable than entrenched thinking." The temperature dropped another few degrees. These were people who'd built their careers in shipping, who'd navigated international waters, both literally and figuratively, for decades. Ethan had just dismissed their expertise as entrenched thinking. "Well," Mr. Caldwell said smoothly, "I'm sure we're all eager to hear your fresh perspective. But first, shall we order dinner?" As menus were distributed, I caught fragments of conversation around the table. Industry gossip, market analysis, personnel updates, the easy familiarity of people who'd worked together for years, who'd trusted each other's judgment, who shared institutional memory. Ethan tried to insert himself into these conversations, but his comments revealed the shallow nature of his knowledge. When Robert mentioned new regulations affecting Pacific shipping routes, Ethan nodded knowingly, while clearly having no idea what he was talking about. When Margaret discussed labor negotiations in Long Beach, he offered generic observations about the importance of maintaining competitiveness. "Your husband is quite confident," Margaret murmured to me during a lull in conversation. "He's always been ambitious," I replied diplomatically. "And you? What are your ambitions, Miss Torres?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, conversations quieted as board members waited for my response. Even Ethan stopped pretending to study the menu. I thought about my father's words, about 8 years of hiding, about Tuesday night's humiliation, about worthlessness. "I think," I said carefully, "it's time I took a more active role in honoring my father's legacy." The approval around the table was palpable. Smiles, nods, a sense of rightness restored. But beside me, Ethan had gone very still. "Your father's legacy?" he repeated. Before I could respond, Mr. Caldwell raised his wine glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to propose a toast to Miguel Torres, who built something lasting, and to his daughter, who I have no doubt will carry that legacy forward with wisdom and grace." "To Miguel Torres," the table echoed, "and to Lena." As crystal clinked around the table, Ethan sat frozen, his wineglass untouched, his face pale under the chandelier's warm light. The dinner had only just begun, but I could already see the exact moment when his carefully constructed world would come crashing down. And despite everything, I felt no satisfaction in his confusion, only a quiet growing certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. The main course had been cleared when Mr. Caldwell stood, his wineglass catching the chandelier's light. "Before we hear Mr. Torres's presentation, I'd like to address something that's been troubling me." Ethan straightened, clearly believing this was his moment to shine. Around the table, board members leaned forward with interest.
There's been considerable discussion lately about our company's ownership structure, specifically criticism of what some have called our anonymous shareholders and their supposed lack of business acumen. I felt Ethan tense beside me, though he had no idea where this was heading. These shareholders have been described as trust fund babies who don't understand modern business realities. There have been suggestions that our commitment to employee welfare, pension obligations, and community investment represents sentimental thinking that inhibits profitability. Margaret Fontaine's expression had turned glacial. Robert Kim was no longer bothering to hide his disapproval. Around the table, the temperature seemed to drop with each word. "Mr. Torres," Mr. Caldwell said, turning his gaze directly to my husband, "you've been quite vocal about these opinions, haven't you?"
Ethan's face flushed, but his arrogance overrode his caution. I stand by my analysis. This company could increase profits by 30% with proper restructuring. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions about legacy obligations that no longer serve shareholder interests. Ah, yes, shareholder interests. Mr. Caldwell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And you feel confident speaking on behalf of our shareholders? I feel confident speaking about sound business practices, Ethan replied, his voice rising slightly. Whether the shareholders appreciate it or not, this company needs leaders who understand 21st century realities instead of clinging to outdated sentimentality. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 8 years of hidden truth pressing against my chest. How fascinating, Mr. Caldwell said quietly. Miss Torres, would you like to respond to your husband's assessment of shareholder priorities? Every eye at the table turned to me. Ethan looked confused, still not understanding why anyone would ask his wife to comment on corporate strategy. But the board members watched with an intensity that made the air itself seem to thicken. I stood slowly, my black silk dress catching the light as I rose. My voice, when it came, was steady and clear. I think, I said, that anyone who dismisses employee welfare as outdated sentimentality fundamentally misunderstands what makes a company truly valuable. Ethan's confusion deepened. Lena, what are you... I think, I continued, my voice growing stronger, that someone who refers to the founder's legacy as soft thinking has never built anything lasting themselves. Perhaps, Mr. Caldwell said gently, you should tell your husband about your relationship with Torres International. The moment stretched like a held breath. Around the table, board members leaned forward. Ethan's face cycled through confusion, dawning realization, and something approaching horror. My relationship? I repeated, savoring the words. Yes, your ownership stake, to be precise. I looked directly at Ethan, seeing him truly for perhaps the first time in years, not the ambitious executive he pretended to be, not the successful husband he'd convinced himself he was, but a small, insecure man who'd built his confidence by tearing down the woman who loved him. I own 52% of Torres International, I said clearly. I am the majority shareholder you've been criticizing, the trust fund baby whose business acumen you've questioned, the anonymous shareholder whose priorities you've dismissed as sentimental weakness. Ethan's wine glass slipped from his fingers, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. His mouth opened and closed without sound, a fish gasping on dry land. Moreover, I continued, my voice carrying the quiet authority my father had taught me, every legacy obligation you want to eliminate was established by my father, Miguel Torres, who built this company from nothing through exactly the kind of soft thinking you find so objectionable. The gasps around the table weren't from shock. The board had known this moment was coming. They were sounds of satisfaction, of justice finally served, of a balance restored. Ethan found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. That's impossible. Is it? I asked. Impossible that the woman you called worthless might actually hold the power to make or break your career? Impossible that your wife might understand business better than you assumed? Or is it just impossible that you've been wrong about everything? Have I? I asked quietly. Or have you simply never asked? In 8 years of marriage, Ethan? Have you ever once inquired about my inheritance from my father? Have you ever wondered how I could afford to stay home and arrange flowers without any visible means of support? His mouth opened and closed again. Around the table, board members exchanged glances that ranged from embarrassed to disgusted. You assumed, I continued. You assumed I was financially dependent on you. You assumed my father left me nothing but sentimental trinkets. You assumed that a woman who chose to prioritize her marriage over corporate ambition must be incompetent, worthless, dependent. Stop saying that word, he whispered. Worthless? I smiled, feeling no warmth in it. But that's what you called me, isn't it? Tuesday night, at our anniversary dinner, in front of a restaurant full of people. Your exact words were that I was worthless when it comes to anything that actually matters. Margaret Fontaine's expression had moved beyond disapproval into active hostility. You said that to her? At your anniversary dinner? Ethan's face had gone gray. It was a misunderstanding. I was frustrated about work, and there's no misunderstanding about publicly humiliating your wife, Robert Kim said flatly. Especially when that wife happens to be the person who signs your paychecks. I didn't know, Ethan's voice rose to nearly a shout. How was I supposed to know she owned the company? She never told me. And why do you think that was? Mr. Caldwell asked, his tone deceptively gentle. Ethan faltered. Could it be because she wanted a husband who loved her for herself, not her inheritance? Could it be because she hoped to build a marriage based on mutual respect rather than financial opportunism? The truth of it settled over the table like dust. Every person there could see the dynamic clearly now, the wealthy heiress who'd hidden her fortune to find genuine love, and the ambitious climber who'd revealed his true nature the moment he felt secure enough to show contempt. The irony is remarkable, Margaret observed coldly. You've spent years climbing the corporate ladder at her company, building your reputation on her father's legacy, living off the profits of her inheritance while treating her like a burden you had to support. Ethan's breathing had become shallow, rapid. I need to understand. Lena, you really own 52%. I really do. And you've known all along that I work for your company? I've known. Then why? He stopped, seeming to realize that any question he asked would only make him sound worse. Why did I let you dismiss Miguel Torres's legacy as outdated sentiment? Why did I sit quietly while you called the shareholders parasites? Why did I allow you to plan the destruction of everything my father built? He nodded mutely. Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought no one important was watching. The devastation on his face was complete. Around the table, board members were no longer bothering to hide their disdain. His presentation folder sat unopened beside his plate, his grand plan for corporate restructuring suddenly revealed as an ambitious employee's scheme to impress his unknowing boss. I think, Mr. Caldwell said, we can consider tonight's presentation canceled. The drive home passed in complete silence. Ethan stared out the passenger window while I navigated Seattle's evening traffic, both of us lost in the wreckage of 8 years of carefully constructed illusions. Our apartment felt different when we walked in. Smaller somehow, less significant. The symbols of our life together, the expensive furniture, the art I'd chosen, the perfectly curated domesticity, seemed hollow now. Props in a play that had finally ended. I need a drink, Ethan muttered, heading for the bar cart. We need to talk, I said. He poured 3 fingers of whiskey and drank half of it before turning to face me. His earlier panic had settled into something harder, more bitter. So what now? He asked. You've humiliated me in front of my colleagues, destroyed my credibility, and probably ended my career. What's the next act in your revenge fantasy? His words stung, but not in the way he intended. After years of absorbing his casual cruelty, his deliberate attempt to wound me felt almost quaint. Revenge? I repeated. Ethan, all I did was tell the truth. You set me up. You orchestrated that entire dinner to make me look like a fool. I attended a board meeting at my own company. You made yourself look like a fool. He finished his whiskey and poured another. Your company. Right. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Are you? Or are you trying to figure out how to use it to your advantage? The accuracy of my guess showed in his face. Even now, even after everything, his first instinct was calculation rather than accountability. 8 years, Lena. 8 years you've been lying to me. I kept my inheritance private. That's not the same as lying. It's exactly the same as lying. His voice rose, fueled by whiskey and wounded pride. What kind of marriage is built on secrets like that? The kind where one person is trying to protect themselves from the other person's opportunism. That's not fair. Isn't it? I sat down across from him, suddenly exhausted. Ethan, be honest. If you'd known from the beginning that I owned Torres International, would you have married me for love or for access? He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. We both knew the answer. I loved you. I wanted a normal life, a genuine partnership. I thought if I kept the inheritance separate, we could build something real together. And instead, you built something fake. No, you built something fake. I just let you. The distinction mattered, though I wasn't sure he could see it. For 8 years, I'd been authentic in every way except one. I genuinely supported his career, genuinely managed our home, genuinely tried to be a good wife. The only thing I'd hidden was my ability to be financially independent. He'd been fake about everything: his respect for me, his gratitude for my support, his basic regard for my humanity. The man who'd called me worthless had been performing love while feeling contempt. So what happens now? He asked again, his anger deflating into something more like fear. Now we decide what we want our future to look like. Our future? He laughed, but it sounded hollow. You think there's an our future after tonight? I studied his face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse, any acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused, any indication that he understood how his actions had driven us to this point. Instead, I saw wounded pride, self-pity, and the calculating look of a man trying to figure out how to minimize his losses. I think, I said slowly, that depends entirely on you. What do you mean? I mean whether you're capable of genuine accountability, whether you can acknowledge what you've done to our marriage, to me, to us, whether you want to rebuild something authentic or just salvage what you can from the wreckage. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his whiskey. I never meant to hurt you, he finally said. It wasn't enough, nowhere near enough, but it was a start. The question was whether he could grow from there, whether 8 years of contempt could be overcome by genuine remorse and effort. Looking at his face, seeing the self-focus even in his apparent contrition, I began to suspect I already knew the answer. But I'd give him the chance to prove me wrong. After 8 years of hiding my power, I could afford to be generous with my time. The reckoning was just beginning. 6 months later, I walked through the glass doors of Torres International with the confidence of someone who finally knew exactly where she belonged. The morning Seattle sun streamed through the 43rd floor windows of what was now officially my office. Not a borrowed space or a reluctant invitation, but the corner suite that had once been my father's. His portrait hung on the wall behind my desk, and sometimes I caught myself asking him questions during difficult meetings. The board had initially worried about my lack of formal business experience, but it turned out that 26 years of watching Miguel Torres build an empire, combined with 8 years of observing corporate dynamics from the inside, had taught me more than any MBA program could. The divorce papers had been finalized 3 weeks ago. Ethan had fought for alimony, claiming he'd given up opportunities to support my domestic lifestyle. His lawyer's argument fell apart when mine presented evidence of his actual contributions to our household versus mine. The settlement was minimal, enough to get him started somewhere else, not enough to live comfortably without working. He'd called me twice since the papers were signed. The first time, 2 months ago, was desperate. His voice on the phone carried the hollow quality of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed entirely. He'd been let go from Torres International within a week of the board dinner. Not as punishment, Mr. Caldwell assured me, but because his colleagues could no longer work with someone who'd shown such profound disrespect for the company's values and leadership. Lena, please. I made mistakes, but we can work through this. I understand now what you mean to the company, what you've always meant. We can be partners, real partners. I'd listened to his pitch with the same patience I brought to difficult vendor negotiations. When he finished, I'd said simply, "You called me worthless, Ethan. That wasn't a mistake. It was the truth about how you see me. I can't build a life with someone who fundamentally doesn't respect who I am." The second call had come last week, after he'd apparently heard about the feature article in Forbes, "The Hidden Heiress: How Lena Torres is Quietly Revolutionizing Corporate Leadership." The piece highlighted our new profit-sharing expansion, the climate initiative I'd spearheaded, and the employee wellness programs that had made Torres International one of Fortune's best companies to work for. "I saw the magazine," he'd said, his voice carefully controlled. "You look happy." "I am happy. I never meant for things to end this way." "I know you didn't, but Ethan, you never meant for them to be real either." There had been a long pause before he hung up. I didn't expect him to call again. My assistant knocked on the office door, interrupting my thoughts. "Miss Torres, the Henderson account team is here for the 10:30 meeting. Send them in." As 6 executives filed into my office, people who 6 months ago had watched my husband dismiss me as worthless, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a life finally aligned with its true purpose. They treated me with respect due to their leader, but more than that, they seemed genuinely excited to work with someone who understood that business success and human dignity weren't mutually exclusive concepts. The meeting was about expanding our Pacific shipping routes, but as we discussed environmental impact assessments and crew welfare standards, I found myself thinking about that anniversary dinner that had changed everything. Ethan had been wrong about almost everything, but he'd been right about one thing. Some people build things, others just exist. I'd spent 8 years existing in the margins of my own life, accepting a diminished version of myself to preserve a marriage that was never real. Now I was building, not just a company, but a legacy my father would recognize, a vision that honored both profit and purpose. When the meeting ended, I stood at my office windows looking out over the city my father had loved, the port where he'd started with one small shipping contract and a belief that business could be a force for good. My phone buzzed with a text from Marisol. "Lunch today? I want to hear about the new sustainable shipping initiative." I typed back, "Absolutely. Oh, and Mari, thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me I was never worthless, even when I forgot it myself." "Never again, mija. Never again." I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket and returned to my desk where quarterly reports waited alongside plans for the Employee Scholarship Fund expansion. Outside, the morning was bright with possibility. At 34, I was finally living the life my father had prepared me for, not as Miguel Torres's hidden daughter, but as Lena Torres, leader in my own right. The woman who had once been called worthless now knew exactly what she was worth. Everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.